Okay, so how does a sacred text handle being mocked? Let's check out the Quran's pretty unique approach. Does it just shut the critic down, or does it actually engage, even with a sarcastic question? You see, in the Quran, these questions don't get brushed off. They actually spark entire chapters of answers. Let's look at two really famous examples. Each one started with a pretty cynical question. We're going to focus on the second one, because it shows this amazing way of making a point. So a skeptic literally crushes old bones and asks, how could these ever come back to life? Instead of just saying God can do it, the text lays out this incredible logical proof. The answer comes in 3 logical steps, with each one building on the last.
The logic is simple. If you can create something from scratch, recreating it is the easy part, right?
Okay, now for step 2. This is where it gets really cool, using nature itself as proof. It points to something wild, creating fire from a green, wet tree, a burning thing from its opposite. So, the point is, if God can create from opposites, then creating life from death fits that pattern. And for the final step, it's all about scale. It asks us to just look up. Basically, if someone built the entire universe, can't they rebuild one tiny human? So you have this simple taunt met with this multi-layered, logical response. Pretty amazing. Okay, now let's circle back to that first mocking question. The response uses the same playbook. The entire chapter becomes the answer. It just points to all the wonders in creation as evidence. And its famous line, repeated over and over, challenges you. Can you really deny this evidence? So what's the big takeaway here? It's more than just theology. It's a whole communication strategy. It's a method that takes ridicule seriously and turns it into this profound teaching moment. And, this isn't just about an ancient text. It's a powerful way to think about our own conversations today.
So what happens when a cynical question gets an absolutely epic 78-verse answer? Well, we're about to find out. Picture this. It's the 7th century, and a single question is thrown at the Prophet Muhammad. And this wasn't asked out of genuine curiosity. No, this was a challenge. And the response became one of the most poetic and profound chapters in the entire Quran.
This is the question that started it all. And what is the merciful? Now, it was posed by the polytheists of Mecca. And on the surface, it sounds like a pretty straightforward request for a definition. But the real intention behind it, it was anything but simple.
Yeah. You see, this question was pure mockery. It was their way of saying, this merciful you keep going on about, what even is that? It was meant to belittle, to dismiss the whole idea. But the Quran's response was just extraordinary. Instead of dismissing the mockers, it took their question with the utmost seriousness, dedicating an entire chapter, Surah Ar-Rahman, just to answer it.
And what's really fascinating here is that this isn't some one-off thing. The Quran actually has a clear method for dealing with cynical challenges like this. It flips moments of mockery into these incredibly powerful teaching opportunities. To really get how it does this, let's look at another example real quick. In another chapter, Surah Yasin, a skeptic literally holds up a rotten, crumbling bone and asks, with total scorn, who can bring this back to life? Just like the question about the merciful, it's not a real inquiry, it's a statement of disbelief. And just like before, the Quran takes the challenge head-on with this rigorous, logical argument.
So how do you answer someone who thinks resurrection is just impossible? You don't start with some abstract theological lecture. No, you start with pure logic, using ideas they themselves would already accept. The Quran lays out this brilliant 3-step case.
Okay, first, there's the argument from the source. If you believe God created life from absolute nothingness to begin with, isn't it logical that he can recreate it from something that already exists? The harder job is already done. Second, the method. Look around in nature. God is constantly creating things from their opposites. We'll touch on a great example in a second. And third, scale. The being who created entire galaxies, you're saying he can't recreate one single person? It's all about putting things in perspective. And this quote right here, it just perfectly captures that second point, creating from opposites. The Quran points to this stunning everyday miracle. God creates fire, hot, dry, consuming, from a green, wet tree. It's a perfect metaphor from the natural world. If he can bring forth something from its total opposite, then bringing life out of the stillness of death is definitely within his power. So with that logical groundwork laid, the Quran can finally tackle the first question.
So how does all this circle back to our original question, what is the merciful? Well, having established the logic of God's power, the chapter now switches gears to provide tangible,
observable evidence. It doesn't give you a dry dictionary definition, it gives you a tour of reality. The answer starts with the ground right under our feet, the earth itself, made just right for us to live on. Then it points to all the things that keep us going, fruits of every single variety, the complex design of date palms, the essential grains we rely on, and just the simple pleasure of fragrant plants. Every single one is a sign.
And after laying out this first wave of evidence, a powerful question appears for the first of 31 times. It's a direct challenge back to the audience. That's both humans and jinn. So, which of the favors of your Lord would you two deny? It completely changes the dynamic, turning a list into a conversation and forcing you to think.
The tour continues, moving from what sustains us to what we are. It points to the origin of humanity, created from a type of clay, like pottery. And then, in the same breath, it mentions another creation, the jinn, made from a smokeless flame of fire. You have the same creator, mastering completely different elements.
And there it is again, that question echoing back. The miracle of our own existence, the very stuff we're made of, is framed as a gift, a favor. How could anyone possibly deny that? All right, now we get to one of the most famous signs. The Quran points to this amazing phenomenon where two large bodies of water, say salt water and fresh water, meet, but they don't mix. They flow right next to each other. They touch, but they keep their own distinct properties.
The Quran actually gives this phenomenon a specific name, barzakh. It basically means a barrier or a partition. Now, this isn't some physical wall, of course. It's a natural law, a divine system that maintains this incredible balance in the world's waters.
And what comes out of these seas? The chapter points out two treasures, pearls and coral. And you know, this is such a brilliant metaphor. Coral is usually near the surface, right? It's beautiful and easy to get to. That's kind of like surface-level knowledge. But pearls, to get a pearl, you have to dive deep into the dark and really search for it. It represents that profound wisdom that takes real effort to find. And both are treasures from the very same source.
The tour then points to something that we humans build, but that's only possible because of divine laws. Massive ships, sailing the seas like floating mountains. They only work because of the underlying laws of physics, buoyancy, density, wind, all systems put in place by that same merciful creator. One last time, the refrain hammers the point home. After this grand tour, from a single grain of wheat to the vast oceans holding up ships, the evidence for a merciful, powerful, and intelligent creator is just overwhelming. The question just hangs there in the air. What part of all this reality can you possibly deny? But wait, the answer doesn't stop with the physical world. That whole tour of creation, that was just the setup. The final part of the answer goes beyond the tangible and gets to the ultimate nature of existence itself.
This right here is the climax. The Quran declares that everything we've just looked at, the earth, the seas, the ships, even our own selves, is fani, meaning temporary, finite, destined to perish. But one thing is baki, eternal and everlasting, the face of your Lord, the owner of all majesty and honor. That is the ultimate answer to what is the merciful. He is the permanent reality in a universe of temporary things.
So the key takeaway is this. The Quran never gave a simple definition. In response to that mocking question, it didn't just say, the merciful is an entity that, nope. Instead, it took the questioner on a grand tour of their own reality. It essentially said, you want to know what the merciful is? Look at the sky, look at the earth, look at the seas, look at yourself, all of it. That is the evidence of the merciful.
And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. What does it mean for the relationship between seeing and believing? When the answer to a question about God isn't some complex doctrine, but is instead everything you can see, touch, and experience? It suggests that maybe the most profound signs aren't hidden away in ancient texts, but they're all around us, all the time, just waiting for us to notice.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are opening up a file that creates a bridge between two worlds that, they usually don't talk to each other. I'm talking about hard science, chemistry, physics, hydrography, and, theology.
It is a fascinating intersection. You're right. Usually people keep those in separate drawers in their minds. One is for facts, the other is for faith.
Exactly. But today, we're going to see what happens when you just, dump those drawers out on the table together.
Yeah.
The catalyst for this conversation is a lecture by Professor Dr. Mehmet Okuyan. He is tackling a chapter of the Quran, Surah Ar-Rahman, but he's doing it through a lens that is incredibly analytical. He calls the whole concept a divine clapback.
A divine clapback. That is certainly a very modern, very vivid way to frame a 7th century text.
It is, isn't it? But to understand the clapback, we have to understand the insult that triggered it. And the source material, it paints this scene really well. You have a group of skeptics in Mecca. They are cynical, they're powerful, and they hear this new name for the divine Ar-Rahman, the most merciful. And their response is just pure sarcasm. They ask, and what is Ar-Rahman?
And it's so important to read the tone there correctly. They aren't asking for a dictionary definition.
No.
They're not curious students raising their hands. They are mocking. It's like someone today asking, and who does this guy think he is? It's a challenge to authority, a dismissal.
Right. It's completely dismissive. And the response they get, the clapback, it isn't a lightning bolt from the sky. It isn't a simple definition like Ar-Rahman is X, Y, and Z. No, it is this entire chapter, specifically verses 10 through 32, which acts as this masterclass in argumentation.
Yeah.
Dr. Okuyan's analysis shows us that this isn't just a list of poetic blessings.
Not at all.
It's a systematic dismantling of their entire worldview, using the physical world as exhibit A, B, and C.
And what really stands out in Dr. Okuyan's approach and, why we selected this specific lecture for a deep dive is his methodology. He doesn't just say, believe this because I said so. He connects the dots. He connects nature, the seas, the pearls, the orbit of celestial bodies to theological necessity. He's showing the method behind the message.
Before we get into the heavy stuff, and we are going to talk about the chemical composition of fire and the density of salt water, so, buckle up, we should probably set the stage a little regarding the professor himself.
Yes, context is always key. And in the recording we analyzed, Dr. Okuyan is actually returning to the lectern after a bit of a hiatus. He had just lost his father-in-law.
Which you can just tell completely changes the texture of the lecture, doesn't it? You can hear it in the delivery.
Completely. He speaks quite movingly about the bereavement. He talks about the fragility of life. And ironically, that personal grief becomes the perfect emotional backdrop for this specific text.
How so?
Well, because, as we'll see by the end of this deep dive, this whole chapter eventually builds to this massive contrast between the fleeting nature of everything on Earth, human life, empires, nature itself, and the permanence, the eternity of the divine.
So it grounds the intellectual analysis in very real, very human pain. It's a reminder that these aren't just, abstract concepts for philosophers to debate.
Exactly. They are answers to the problem of mortality that we all face.
Okay, so let's get into the argument. It starts with a defense of resurrection, and the source material highlights a very specific gotcha moment from the skeptics.
Right. This is a classic trope in the historical literature of that time. A skeptic finds a bone in the desert. It's old, it's rotten, probably bleached white by the sun. He picks it up, maybe crumbles it into dust in his hand, and then just blows it into the wind. And he asks, sneering, who can possibly revive this?
And from a purely human perspective, strictly looking at it through our limited timeline, it's a fair question. Once entropy takes over, you don't unbreak the egg. You don't undust the bone.
Precisely. It looks like game over. But the text responds by pivoting the camera to something the audience saw every single day but never, ever stopped to analyze. The green tree.
The green tree argument. The verse references God producing fire from a green tree. Now, when I first read that, I had to pause. Because when I think green tree, I think of live wood. I think of sap. I think of something that just smokes and hisses when you put it near a flame.
It's notoriously hard to burn.
Right. So what's the logic?
That difficulty and that seeming contradiction is exactly the point. Dr. Okuyan breaks down the chemistry here, and it's just brilliant. Think about the primary component of a green living tree. It's full of water.
H2O.
And what is the fundamental function of water in relation to fire?
It's the antagonist. It kills fire. It's what you use to put the fire out.
Correct. Water is the ultimate extinguisher. But, and here's the pivot. Let's look at the periodic table. What is water made of? Hydrogen and oxygen.
Two gas.
Right. And hydrogen is highly flammable, explosively so, the Hindenburg, right? And oxygen is the necessary fuel for combustion to happen at all. Fire needs oxygen to breathe.
So wait, chemically speaking, water is a bond between two elements that are intimately, almost violently tied to the existence of fire.
Yes. Yet, when you combine them into a single molecule, H2O, they create the very thing that destroys fire.
That is a wild paradox when you stop to think about it. You have the essential ingredients for a massive fire locked inside the very thing that puts out a fire.
And the argument Dr. Okuyan extracts from this is the concept of opposites from opposites. The skeptic looks at a dead, bone-dry, lifeless dust and says, life cannot come from this. The divine logic retorts, I bring fire out of wet living trees. It's a direct parallel.
It's an analogy from nature.
A perfect one. And he offers another one from the source, consider hail.
Hail, like ice from the sky.
Exactly. Hailstones. They come from massive storm clouds, right? Those clouds, cumulonimbus clouds, are charged with enormous amounts of electricity. We see it as lightning, which is essentially fire and plasma, hotter than the surface of the sun. So you have solid ice falling from a source of incredible fire.
So the logic is all about consistency. It's saying, if you accept that the Creator can synthesize these opposites in the natural world fire, from water, ice from heat, then synthesizing life from dead dust is just another application of the same fundamental power.
Exactly. It completely bridges the logical gap. It forces the skeptic to admit that their understanding of what's possible is actually very, very limited. They are arguing from a position of ignorance about the world they live in.
That is a solid opening argument. It really does disarm the skepticism by using the physical world against them. But then the text shifts gears. We move from this defense of resurrection to what is probably the most famous part of this chapter. The refrain.
Which of the favors of your Lord will you deny?
It is repeated 31 times. That's a lot.
31 times. In rhetoric, we call this a refrain. But Dr. Okurian points out that in the Arabic tradition, this is takrar, repetition for emphasis. It's hypnotic. It drills the point home. However, if you are reading this in English, you are missing a massive grammatical clue that changes the whole meaning.
I love a good grammar nugget. Lay on me.
Well,
what are we missing in translation?
it's the verb at the end of the phrase, tukatsiban. In English, if I look at you and the listener and say, which of the favors will you deny? The word you is ambiguous.
Right.
It could be you personally, or it could be a stadium full of people. English doesn't really distinguish between singular and plural you anymore, not colloquially.
Right. You is the catch-all. We used to have thee and thou, but not anymore.
Exactly. But Arabic is much more precise. Verbs change their form based on who you're talking to. You have a singular form, you have a plural form. But Arabic also has a dual form, tazni. This verb isn't addressing a crowd. It isn't addressing a single person. It is addressing you too.
You too. Okay, so the million-dollar question, which the professor spends some time on, is, who are the two?
That is the mystery, and it's a big debate. The professor outlines the leading theories from the commentary tradition to try and crack this code. Option A, which is probably the most common interpretation given the context of later verses, is humans and jinns, two distinct species of sentient beings who are being held accountable.
Okay. We will definitely get to the jinns in a minute. What's option B?
Option B is men and women, addressing the two halves of the human experience, the two components of humanity.
Interesting. So it's a gendered address. It's speaking to both sides of the aisle, so to speak.
Potentially, yes. And then option C is believers and disbelievers, the two opposing spiritual camps that exist within those other groups.
Does Dr. Okin pick a winner? Does he plant his flag on one of these?
He actually takes a very nuanced and I think very wise approach. He prefers keeping it open. He argues that narrowing it down too much, saying it's only this one, actually misses the rhetorical punch.
It loses some of its power.
It does. Whether it's men and women or humans and spirits, the point isn't to finger point and ask which one of you is guilty. The point is a rhetorical challenge to any dual forces in existence. It's a cosmic confrontation. How can you two, whoever you are and whatever pairing you exist, possibly deny any of these favors?
It's like when a parent walks into a messy room with two kids and says, I don't care who started it, look at this mess. It encompasses everyone involved.
In a way, yes. It makes the question inescapable. But having said that, the text does then go on to specifically differentiate between two types of creation, which lends a lot of weight back to that human jinn theory. And this brings us right to the origin story.
Right, and the source material gets very, very specific about the stuff we are made of. This isn't just a generic God-made man. It describes the material itself.
It does. For humans, the text uses this incredible phrase, Salsal Kelfahar.
Salsal Kelfahar. It sounds almost musical. Salsal.
It is onomatopoeic. It's meant to evoke a sound. Salsal refers to dry clay. But not just any dry clay. It's clay that is so dry and compacted that if you tap it with your fingernail, it makes a ringing sound. A clear, resonant sound.
Like a bell or a high-quality ceramic pot.
Exactly, like fine pottery. And the second part, fahar, implies exactly that. Pottery or baked clay. Now, the professor addresses a common criticism here. A skeptic might line up different verses of the Quran. One says humans are made of dust, turab. Another says mud, tin. Another says sticky clay, tin al-azib. And this one says baked pottery. And they ask, is the text confused? Which one is it?
Sounds a bit like a continuity error if you just glance at it. Like the script writers couldn't decide on the prop for the creation scene.
Dr. Okian synthesizes this beautifully. He explains them not as contradictions, but as stages of a single manufacturing process. It's a timeline. You start with simple dust, you mix it with water to get mud, you let the mud sit and ferment, it becomes sticky clay like an adhesive. You let that clay dry out in the sun, it becomes salsal, the ringing clay. And perhaps you fire it and it becomes pottery. It's a process of development.
That makes perfect sense. It's describing the evolution of the material itself.
Yeah.
But then we have the other group in this dual address, the jinns. The text says they are created from marij min nar.
Nar is fire. Marij is a very specific descriptor. It means a smokeless mixture or a pure, scorching flame. Think of the very tip of a candle flame, the blue part, where it's almost invisible but incredibly hot. The purest form of the fire.
Yeah, this is where I really appreciated the professor's tone in the lecture.
Yeah.
Because when you start talking about jinns, spirits, unseen beings, things can get very superstitious very, very quickly. You get into ghost stories and folklore and all sorts of wild speculation.
Absolutely. And Dr. Okian is incredibly pragmatic here. He puts up a hard stop. He refuses to speculate on the biological nature of jinns, what they look like, how they operate. His rule is very simple. I only know what the text explicitly tells me.
And what does it say?
It tells us two things for certain. One, they were created before humans. And two, they are made of this specific type of energy or fire. That's it. Anything beyond that, he says, is entering the realm of guesswork, not knowledge.
He actually takes a real swing at people who claim to have secret knowledge about this, doesn't he?
He does. He is very critical of the whole industry of exorcism and superstition that pops up in some cultures. He tells this story, and it's quite funny, but also really sad, about how people attribute simple family drama to jinn possession.
The bride with the mother-in-law issue.
Yes. He uses that as a classic example. He says that often a possession is just a newlywed bride who has a serious conflict with her mother-in-law, and the psychological stress manifests as erratic behavior or fainting spells. Instead of dealing with the complex and very real family dynamic,
They call him the exorcist.
the family says, oh, she's possessed by a jinn. It's a convenient scapegoat.
Right. It's not my fault we have a terrible relationship. It's the spirit.
Exactly. And Dr. Okian calls that out aggressively. He has this great line. If someone claims to have secret knowledge about the unseen world, it's not knowledge, it's fabrication. By definition, knowledge has to be verifiable. He sticks strictly to the text. It's not a demon, it's just your in-laws.
Practical life advice from a theology lecture.
Yep.
I love that. So, okay, we have the creation of these two distinct groups from two distinct materials. Then the text zooms out, way, way out to the cosmos. We get this phrase, Lord of the two easts and Lord of the two wests.
Rabul Mashriqin, or Rabul Maghribain.
Now, in my limited navigational experience, I have a compass. It has one east and one west, unless you keep going around the globe, I guess. But why two?
Well, this is another one of those moments where the deep dive methodology really shines. The professor doesn't just give one answer. He offers three distinct interpretations, and they all layer on top of each other to create a much richer meaning.
Okay, walk us through them. What's the first one, the astronomical take?
Astronomically, the two easts could refer to the rising points of the two major celestial bodies relevant to us. The sun and the moon, they don't rise in the same place. They have different trajectories, different cycles. So two distinct easts on the horizon.
Okay, that tracks. I can visualize that. What about the seasonal angle?
This one is visually intuitive if you've ever paid attention to nature. The sun doesn't rise in the exact same spot on the horizon every day of the year. It oscillates. You have the extreme point of sunrise in summer. That's the June solstice, the longest day of the year. And the extreme point of sunrise in winter, the December solstice. Those are the two boundaries, the two pillars of the east.
Right. If you watch the sunrise all year, it travels along the horizon between those 2 points.
Precisely. So God is the Lord of both limits and every single point of sunrise in between. But then there's the third interpretation, the geopolitical one, which gives us the historical flavor of the 7th century.
This is the empire's theory.
Yes. At the time of this revelation, the known world was dominated by two superpowers. To the east, you had the Persian Sasanian Empire. To the west, you had the Roman or Byzantine Empire. They were the lords of their respective directions. They controlled the trade routes, the armies, the world.
So by saying, I am the lord of the two easts and two wests, The text is basically throwing down a gauntlet. It's a political statement. It's
Yeah.
saying, you think these emperors own the world. No, I own the empires.
Exactly. It's a direct rejection of imperial claims to dominion. But Dr. Akuyan goes even further. He points out that other verses in the Quran use east in the singular, and still others use easts in the plural. His conclusion is a kind of grand unification theory of direction. God is the Lord of every point of existence, whether it's a specific GPS location, a seasonal shift on the horizon, or a global power block, it all falls under one single authority.
Okay, so from the grand scale of empires, let's bring it back down to earth, or rather down to the water, because the next section covers something that people argue about constantly on the internet, the meeting of the seas.
Verses 19 and 20. He released the two seas, meeting side by side. Between them is a barrier, so neither of them transgresses.
I have seen the videos, you know, the ones where they show the deep blue water of the Atlantic meeting the lighter, silt-filled water of a river, and there's this distinct sharp line between them. It looks like a wall in the ocean.
And the science completely holds up. The professor discusses this phenomenon. It's hydrography. When fresh water meets salt water, or when rivers carrying sediment flow into the clear sea, they don't instantly mix. There is a difference in density, in salinity, and in temperature, and those differences create a boundary layer.
He uses the kitchen experiment metaphor to explain this, right, which I thought was very helpful.
Yes, he compares it to olive oil and water. You can pour them into the same glass, they touch, they meet, but they don't mix because of their fundamental molecular differences. That boundary where they touch but remain distinct, that is the barzakh.
The barrier.
But here is where the professor makes a very important clarification, and this is crucial for anyone interested in theology or textual analysis. The word barzakh appears elsewhere in the Quran to describe something completely different.
Oh, right. It's used to describe the barrier between the living and the dead, isn't it? The veil that separates our world from the afterlife.
Correct. And Dr. Okuyan warns us, do not mix your metaphors. In this chapter, Surah Ar-Rahman, barzakh, is a physical barrier of physics density and salinity. In the other context, in Surah Al-Mu'minun, it's a metaphysical barrier preventing the dead from returning to earth. He strongly critiques people who try to use this verse about water to invent some kind of spirit world that interacts with the ocean. He says, keep the water science with the water and the soul science with the soul.
Keep your lanes clear. I like that. It prevents a lot of confusion. But there was one detail about the seas that really blew my mind. The fish.
Ah, yes. The fresh meat anomaly.
The text mentions getting fresh meat, which means fish from both bodies of water, both the salt and the fresh.
Right. And Dr. Koyan points this out as a biological miracle we take for granted because we are just so used to it. Think about a saltwater fish, a tuna or a cod. It lives its entire life in highly saline water. If you or I drank that water, we'd die of dehydration. It's toxic to us in large quantities. But when you catch that fish and you cook it, is the meat salty?
No, not at all. I mean, you have to add salt to it. If you eat sashimi, it's not briny.
Exactly. The fish maintains a biological barrier. Its cells perform reverse osmosis naturally, filtering out the salt. It is a living, breathing desalination plant. You get pure, sweet, non-salty flesh from an extremely salty environment.
It's another example of that opposites from opposites theme we talked about with the fire and the water, creating a pure thing from within a hostile opposite environment.
It is. I never thought about that either until he pointed it out. The fish is a walking miracle of biochemistry.
And the lecture pivots from the meat of the fish to what else you find in the water.
Yeah.
The luxury goods, pearls and coral.
This part is where the professor gets a little sassy with the critics, doesn't he?
He does, and you can tell he enjoys it. So the text says that pearl, lulu, and coral, marjan, come from both of these seas. Now, critics and even some marine biologists have historically pushed back on this. They've said, hold on. Pearls are mostly found in oysters in deep salt water. Coral is often shallower, and you don't typically find them in fresh water.
So they claim the text is factually, scientifically wrong.
Exactly. But Dr. O'Keefe's rebuttal is twofold. First, he makes the scientific humility argument. You haven't dived deep enough.
Just because we haven't found a specific type of freshwater pearl-producing ecosystem yet doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Science is always discovering new species in the depths of the ocean. That's a fair point. Science is always updating itself. We're constantly finding things we thought were impossible.
But his second argument is linguistic and I think much more profound. He looks at the specific verb used in the verse. The Arabic is yakhruju, means they come out. But he cross-references this with other verses that use a similar but crucially different word, tastakruduna. That one means you extract.
Okay, so what is the difference between coming out and extracting?
Come out sounds passive, doesn't it? Like they just float to the top and you can scoop them up with a net. Extract, on the other hand, implies effort. Hard work. Pearls don't just float on the surface waiting for you. You have to dive deep. You have to hold your breath. You have to fight the pressure, find the oyster, and pry it open.
It's an active process.
A very active process. And this leads to my absolute favorite metaphor of this entire deep dive. He turns this whole marine biology lesson into a lesson on how to read the text itself.
This is the real aha moment of the lecture. He says the Quran is like the ocean. It has treasures, but they're at different depths. Coral represents the literal meaning, the surface understanding. It's beautiful, it's colorful, and it's found near the surface. Anyone can see it. You can just look down from the boat and appreciate it.
But the pearls?
The pearls represent hikmah, the deep hidden wisdom. They are inside the hard shell of the oyster, deep underwater. You can't get them by casually glancing. You have to dive. You have to put in the effort. You have to struggle to get them.
And he basically says, don't be a surface reader. Don't just be a coral collector.
Exactly. He calls the deep divers ulul elbab, people of pure intellect, people who engage deeply. He says you must break the shell of your own bias or your own laziness to get the pearl of wisdom that's inside.
And to illustrate the dangers of surface reading, of just grabbing the coral and walking away, he tells that story. I have to share this. It made me laugh out loud when I heard it.
Please do. It's a perfect cautionary tale.
He shares this anecdote from his own teaching experience. He was in a lecture explaining a verse about paradise that describes running springs. The Arabic is Ainun Jariya. Now in Arabic, Ain means spring or eye, and Jariya means running or flowing. It's a beautiful description of a lush, vibrant landscape.
Okay, sounds straightforward enough.
But a listener in the audience who was maybe not paying full attention or perhaps was projecting his own desires onto the text thought he heard carry.
Which sounds very similar but means maidens or concubines.
Yes. So this listener thought the professor was promising beautiful running maidens in paradise instead of waterfalls and springs.
Alas, oh no, that is a significant misunderstanding.
It's a hilarious misunderstanding, but it proves his point perfectly. If you listen superficially or if you listen with your own desires in the forefront, you will hear what you want to hear, not what is actually being said. You end up with running maidens instead of running springs. You miss the entire point.
You've grabbed the coral and completely missed the pearl.
Don't miss the point. Dive for the pearl. That is the motto.
Indeed. It demands active engagement, not passive reception.
So, moving on from the bottom of the sea to the surface, we have ships. The verse mentions Al-Jawari.
And to him belong the ships, raised up in the sea like mountains.
Again, we see this theme of massive, heavy things doing something they shouldn't be able to do. Mountains don't float.
Right, and Dr. Okuyan emphasizes what he calls the physics of grace here. He says, look, we credit the engineering, we credit the steel, the wood, the engine, the captain. We look at a massive supertanker and we say, wow, humans are smart. But ultimately, these massive structures only float because of a fundamental law of nature. The law of buoyancy, the lifting power of water.
Which is a fixed law of physics.
A law established and maintained by the divine. If that law changed by a fraction of a percent, if water became just a little less dense or gravity became a little stronger, your mountain of a ship would sink like a stone. The argument here is that the laws of physics themselves are a favor that we deny or more often just ignore. We take buoyancy completely for granted.
We just think of physics as this neutral background noise. But he's framing it as an active, ongoing gift. And this discussion of God actively sustaining the physical laws leads into a major theological correction regarding the nature of God's activity.
Yes, this is a very significant point in comparative theology. The lecture references verse 29, every day he is in a new matter, or every day he is in a state of action.
And he contrasts this directly with the biblical concept, right?
He does. He contrasts it with the idea found in the book of Genesis of God resting on the seventh day after creation. Dr. Okuyan argues that the concept of resting implies fatigue. It implies a need to recharge. And if the divine is all-powerful, fatigue is a logical impossibility.
So no Sabbath for the Almighty in this particular framework.
Not in this theology. The idea is one of continuous creation. God isn't a clockmaker who wound up the universe billions of years ago and just walked away to let it run on its own. He is constantly, actively creating, expanding the universe. He references Surah Zariyat here, which mentions the expansion of the cosmos and sustaining every moment of existence.
Every day, he is in a new matter. That's actually a really dynamic concept. It feels less like a static, distant creator and more like a universal engine.
It's a very active, present view of the divine. He is actively holding those ships up via the laws of nature. He is actively keeping those seas from mixing. He is actively bringing fire from the tree. It's all happening now in real time.
Which brings us to the inevitable and frankly a little scary conclusion. If he is the only one sustaining it all, what happens to us? To everything.
This is the outro of the lecture, and it hits hard. After all this talk of beauty and pearls and science and grace, we get verse 26. Everyone upon it, the earth will perish.
The word is fani.
Fani, fleeting, perishable, temporary. Everything we see, everything we build, everyone we love is, by its very nature, temporary. The source contrasts this with the only thing that is baki, eternal, and that is the face of your Lord, possessor of majesty and honor.
It's a very stark reality check. We spent the whole deep dive talking about pearls and ships and the rise and fall of empires. And in the end, the text just says, by the way, it's all going away. The Roman Empire, gone. The Persian Empire, gone. Even the stars will eventually burn out.
It moves from the cosmos right down to the individual. It reminds that dual audience, the humans and the jinns, men and women, whoever they are, that their time is limited. And because time is limited, there is accountability.
The outline you put together mentioned a chilling translation of the final reference verse.
Yes. After establishing that everything will perish except for God, the next warning is directed squarely at that dual audience. The professor translates the warning as, "We will attend to you, oh, you two heavyweights."
We will attend to you. That sounds ominous. It sounds like a principal saying to a couple of troublemakers, I'll deal with you two in a minute.
It is absolutely meant to be. It's a signal that the period of grace, of floating ships and green trees and fresh meat from the sea, has a deadline. It's a call to wake up. Despite all the beauty and all the favors, a time of accounting is coming.
So, after all that, what does this all mean for us? For the listener driving to work right now or listening on their headphones?
I think the biggest takeaway is about perspective. The entire lecture is an exercise in changing how you see the world. It asks us to look at the natural world, the chemistry of a tree, the physics of a ship, the biology of a fish, not just as dry, random science, but as evidence of a deliberate, active, and overwhelmingly powerful intelligence.
And if you accept that premise,
then the logic follows. If that power is precise enough to create a physical barrier between salt water and fresh water, then it is precise enough to maintain a moral order and hold us accountable for our actions.
it connects the physical law to the moral law. It says they're not separate things.
Precisely. You can't break the law of buoyancy and expect your ship to float. The implication is maybe you can't break the moral law either without some kind of consequence.
You know, that leads me to my final thought for you, the listener, today. We talked a lot about buoyancy and barriers and these strict physical laws. If the universe really does operate on these unbreakable rules, if water must lift the ship under certain conditions, if fire must come from the chemical reaction, does that imply that moral laws are just as objective, just as unbreakable?
That really is the question, isn't it? We tend to think of morality as flexible, subjective, something we invent as a society. But physics is rigid. This text seems to suggest they come from the same source. And if that's true, maybe they are equally rigid.
Something to chew on while you're stuck in traffic or washing the dishes. Dr. Okuyan's deep dive into Ar-Rahman definitely gives us more than just poetry. It gives us a blueprint of reality.
It certainly does. A challenging one.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep diving for those pearls.
Welcome back to The Critique. We are breaking down Professor Dr. Mehmet Okuyan's Envar al-Quran, Lesson 129, a lecture on Surah Ar-Rahman, verses 10 to 32. Let's get right into it.
Yeah, this is a speaker with evident passion and a lifetime of study. But right out of the gate, we run into a pretty big obstacle.
The structure.
The structure. I want to talk about what I'm calling the long runway problem.
Oh, I felt that. I really did. I was actually checking the timestamp, around minute 10, wondering when we were actually going to get to Surah Ar-Rahman.
And that feeling of impatience is exactly what you want to avoid. The lecture says it's about Ar-Rahman, but a listener has to wait, a really long time to get there.
Well, we start with the eulogy for his father-in-law, which is, of course, very moving.
It is. And then there are the administrative thanks to the camera crew, Muhammad and Zeynep. But when you place those at the very top, you're building this barrier to entry. You're asking the audience to sit through housekeeping before they've gotten any value.
It's that classic struggle, isn't it? Building community versus maintaining focus. He clearly values the people in that room.
Of course. But the digital listener is, ruthless with their attention. And the problem goes deeper than just the thank yous. After that, we pivot into this massive thematic detour.
Surah Yasin.
Surah Yasin, verses 79 to 83. And look, the content there is fascinating. The green tree yielding fire, the chemistry, the whole be and it is process, but it just dominates the first quarter of the lecture.
I see why he did it, though. I mean, there is a logical connection. He's linking that mocking question from Furqan, what is Ar-Rahman, to the answers he sees in both Yasin and Rahman. It's not totally random.
It's not random, no, but it is disproportionate. The logic connects, sure, but structurally, the Yasin segment becomes a vampire. It just sucks all the energy out of the actual topic. By the time we finally land on Rahman verse 10, the listeners already sat through a whole mini lecture on resurrection.
So the setup is longer than the payoff, at least for that first half?
Exactly. So the suggestion is a cold open strategy.
Just jump right in.
Boom. Start immediately with the hook. Just as God answered the mockers in Yasin regarding resurrection, he answers the mockers in Rahman regarding his identity. You're 10 seconds in and you've already connected everything.
And all the personal stuff? The eulogy, the thanks?
Move it to the outro. It becomes a reward for the loyal listeners who stay until the end, and it respects the time of the new listener who just wants to get to the text. It's about prioritizing the audience's intent.
That makes a ton of sense. It clears the path. But, okay, even when you get past that runway, another barrier keeps popping up. Not a time barrier, but an emotional one.
You're talking about the tone.
I am. Throughout the whole thing, I got the sense he was arguing with people who weren't even in the room. He's constantly breaking the fourth wall to address critics or people looking for mistakes.
The defensive scholar trap. It is incredibly common when an expert feels, protective of their territory. He mentions people who are just watching to catch grammatical errors or people stealing his content. It just creates this adversarial tone.
It felt insecure, which is so strange because his knowledge is obviously so deep. There's that moment where he explains the grammar of al-Maharbi, the ships.
A brilliant linguistic point.
It's fantastic, the dropped ya due to the kasra vowel, but he can't just leave it at that. He immediately pivots to, some people ask just to catch me making a mistake.
And in that moment, the focus shifts from the majesty of the text to the ego of the speaker. Instead of marveling at the Quranic Arabic, you're suddenly thinking about his internet comment section. It just breaks the spell.
It happens with the live audience, too. He stops everything to ask, is anyone sleeping? And then kind of scolds them. You can't sleep while listening to me.
That's the worst kind of distraction. He creates a distraction to complain about a distraction. It comes off like a disappointed teacher, not a spiritual guide.
So what's the fix? If you see someone nodding off or he knows critics are watching, what's the move?
Maintain an expository authority persona. Confidence is quiet. If you know the grammar of El-Savari is correct, and he does, then just explain the rule. Trust that the knowledge itself will silence the critics. You don't need to acknowledge them.
Just teach it.
Just teach it. The people who want to learn will be grateful, and the trolls, well, they're irrelevant.
And the sleeping guy?
Rhetorical engagement. Don't attack the behavior. Attack the intellect. Instead of asking, is anyone sleeping, ask a challenging question. Something like, why does the verse say 2 easts? Does that make sense to you? That wakes people up naturally, because they don't want to miss the answer.
You're pulling them back in instead of pushing them away.
You're treating them like scholars, not unruly students. It changes the whole energy.
Okay, I want to shift to the content itself now, because this is where the stakes feel highest. We've talked about time barriers and emotional barriers, but there's a logical barrier here too.
Ah, yes. This is the third and maybe most critical point. Argumentation and logic. Specifically, navigating the dangers of scientific concordism.
Concordism? So that's the attempt to make scripture match up perfectly with, current scientific models.
And the risk is when the speaker insists on a literal interpretation that just conflicts with established observation. He spends a lot of time on verses 19 to 22 about the two seas releasing pearls and coral.
The text says, out of them both come pearl and coral.
Out of them both, and he really digs his heels in here. He acknowledges the scientific consensus that pearls are generally saltwater, certain corals aren't in freshwater, but he just dismisses it. He claims scientists just haven't dived deep enough yet.
That sounded a lot like a God of the Gaps argument to me. If science disagrees with my reading, then science must be wrong.
It creates a massive vulnerability. It forces an educated listener to choose between the speaker's specific biological claim and their general knowledge of marine biology. It just makes the theology feel fragile.
But isn't there some value in holding to the text? If it says both, shouldn't he defend both?
He should defend the text, but he doesn't need to defend a rigid biological literalism. And the tragedy is, he actually introduces a brilliant metaphor later on that solves this whole problem for him.
Oh, you mean the surface coral versus deep dive pearls idea?
Yes, about reading the Quran. He says the literal meaning is like surface coral, but the Ulo el Bab, the people of deep understanding, have to dive deep to find the pearls of meaning.
That was my favorite part of the lecture. It was so actionable, so profound.
He should have just used that. That spiritual application should have been the primary interpretation of the verse. Instead of getting bogged down in a debate about freshwater oysters, he could have pivoted to the metaphorical meaning.
So the suggestion is, when the text is scientifically difficult, pivot from literal scientific fact to, a phenomenological meaning?
Or metaphorical. Preserve the integrity of the scripture without battling marine biologists. For example, he could suggest out of them both refers to the collective genus of water itself, or focus on the effort of extraction.
He actually does this really well somewhere else in the lecture.
He does.
The part on the two easts and two wests was fantastic.
That was the strongest argument in the entire piece. He didn't get stuck on astronomical literalism. He offered the possibilities, solstices and equinoxes, but then he pivoted to a historical and political interpretation.
Persia and Rome. The East and the West.
Exactly. He argued the verse means God owns all powers, not just the superpowers of the day. That felt robust. It felt like it had real weight.
Because it was grounded in history and linguistics, not shaky science.
It doesn't fight reality, it transcends it. And that's where the lecture is at its strongest. The weakest points are when he tries to force a scientific fact that just isn't fully supported.
It's almost like he's trying to prove the Quran is true by proving it's a science textbook. But in doing that, he sort of diminishes it.
The Quran doesn't need to be a science textbook to be true. I mean, his discussion of Salsal the ringing clay was excellent. He admitted we don't have a perfect modern equivalent, but explained the auditory imagery. That's honest, evocative exegesis.
And you contrast that with the insistence on freshwater pearls.
And you see the difference between interpreting a text and forcing a fact. It's ironic because he tells that story about the man wanting to name his daughter a negative word from the Quran.
Right, Kibia.
And he mocks that kind of superficiality. But by insisting on a rigid biological reading, he's risking a similar mistake, missing the forest for the oysters. He misses the deep dive meaning that he himself proposed.
So let's zoom out. The so what of all this? Why does fixing the structure, the tone, and the logic matter so much here?
Because the source material is incredibly rich. I mean, the insights on the two weights, the thakalan, being humans and jinn, that's profound. The connection between the ships like mountains and the laws of buoyancy, compelling. But these gems are hidden behind a defensive wall and a long meandering intro.
We want the listener to get to those insights without having to fight through all the friction.
Exactly. Remove the defensiveness, you remove the emotional friction. Fix the structure, you remove the time friction. Soften the scientific literalism, you remove the intellectual friction. And what you're left with is a pure, powerful exploration of the text.
So let's give our listener and the speaker some concrete action items for the next lecture.
Okay, first, structure. Start cold. Use that forecon connection as your very first sentence. That hooks the audience immediately. Save the eulogy and the thanks for the very end.
Right. It honors the people without losing the audience. What about the tone?
Tone. Adopt that expository authority. Cut all the meta-commentary about the sleeping guy, the content thieves, the grammar critics. Just teach the lesson. Don't fight the room. If you want to wake people up, ask a question that wakes them up intellectually.
And finally, argumentation.
Logic. Pivot to the metaphorical. When the text seems to contradict standard science, don't fight the science. Use the deep dive metaphor he himself created. Frame the freshwater pearls as a spiritual reality, not a biological hill to die on.
This has been really productive. The material clearly comes from a deep love for the text.
The passion is undeniable. The linguistic connections are top tier. With just a few adjustments to the pacing and tone, this goes from a lecture to a masterclass.
To our listener who submitted this, you have a wealth of knowledge here. The insights are incredibly valuable. Don't let the administrative tasks or the defensive asides dilute that value.
You have the pearls. You don't need to spend so much time talking about the oyster shell.
We encourage you to refine the script, apply these changes, and submit the next lecture for review.
Yeah, especially since verse 33 is coming up, the challenge to penetrate the heavens and the earth. That's a huge scientific topic. I'd love to see how these principles get applied there.
That brings us to the end of this critique. Thank you for listening. Keep diving deep.
And keep the runway short.
Until next time.
Welcome to the debate. Today we're opening what the source material calls the universe book. We're going to engage in a really rigorous dissection of Surah Ar-Rahman, specifically verses 10 through 32, and we're drawing directly from the exegesis of Professor Dr. Mehmet Okuyan. Now, this text is famous for its rhythm, its refrain, its haunting beauty, really. But we're here to answer a harder, more contentious question. Is this poetry? Or is it physics? Are these verses precise scientific data points describing, say, molecular barriers in the ocean intended to prove divine authorship? Or are we making a category error here, reading a literary masterpiece like a science textbook? I am the advocate, and I'll be arguing that the text offers a sophisticated, process-based description of reality that anticipated modern science by centuries.
And I am the dissenter. And my view is that while the imagery is undeniably powerful, treating these verses like a hydrography manual, it leads to some pretty serious contradictions. I'm thinking specifically of the pearls in freshwater dilemma. So I'll be arguing that the text is best understood through history, through linguistic nuance and metaphor, not by trying to force it to align with, the latest scientific journal.
Okay, so let's start with intent. Dr. Okuyan frames this surah as a direct, almost, aggressive response to a question from Surah Al-Furqan. The polytheists asked, mockingly, and what is Ar-Rahman? They weren't asking for a definition, they were dismissing the concept entirely.
Right. It was a rhetorical rejection. Basically, who is this God you keep talking about?
Exactly. And the text responds not with, abstract theology, but with concrete physical evidence. It points to the insha, the building process of creation. And there's a huge misconception here, which Okuyan corrects, about the phrase kun fayakun, be and it is. People think this means a magical, instantaneous pop. God speaks and poof, there's a universe.
That is the standard understanding.
Immediate manifestation. But the grammar suggests something else. Okuyan explains it as be, and it begins to become. It initiates a process. It's the difference between a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat and a gardener planting a seed that through specific stages becomes a tree. The text is describing a universe governed by laws, by stages, by distinct physical processes. It's an engineering manual, not a magic show.
I agree that process is key, but I fundamentally disagree that this process is meant to be read as science in our modern sense. When you put on those science classes, you miss the sociology. I mean, take the verse about the Lord of the two Easts and the two Wests. A scientific literalist tries to map this to the summer and winter solstices, the orbital mechanics of the sun.
Which is a perfectly valid astronomical reading. The sun does have different rising and setting points throughout the year.
It is valid, sure, but it completely ignores the geopolitical reality of the 7th century. we have to remember who this was revealed to. Ukalyan points out that the East was shorthand for the Persian Empire and the West was Rome. These were the superpowers claiming they owned the Earth. So the verse isn't teaching us about the sun's orbit. It's dismantling a political worldview. It's saying Rome doesn't own the West. Persia doesn't own the East. God owns both. It's a statement of authority, not astronomy. If you're busy calculating the solstice, you miss the revolution.
That is a potent historical layer, I'll grant you that. But you can't just strip the physical world out of the text when the text itself keeps pointing to it. You say don't look at the science, but the text literally asks us to look at the composition of matter. Look at the green trees. The verse asks, who created fire for you from the green tree?
I mean, it's a reference to fuel. Wood burns.
It's so much more than that. Okuchin breaks this down chemically, and this is where that universe book idea really shines. A green tree is wet. It's full of water. Now think about the chemical composition of water. H2O, hydrogen and oxygen.
I do recall my high school chemistry, yes.
Then you know the paradox. Hydrogen is highly flammable, it's explosive. Oxygen is the very element that allows burning to happen. Yet when you bond them, you get water, which extinguishes fire. The text is highlighting that God creates opposites from opposites. He extracts fire from the wet tree. He extracts lightning, which is fire, from clouds, which are made of water and ice.
So you're saying the text is referencing the periodic table?
I'm saying the text uses the fundamental volatility of matter, this idea that fire is hidden inside water, to make a logical argument for resurrection. If the Creator can extract fire from wet wood, which seems impossible on the surface, then he can certainly extract a living soul from a dead bone. It's not just poetry. It's a proof based on physical laws.
See, I love the logic, but this is exactly where that approach becomes dangerous. If you apply that strict chemical analysis to the tree, you have to apply it to everything else, and that leads you right into a trap. What about the jinn?
The creation of the jinn?
Yes. The text says they're created from Maria, a smokeless mixture of fire. Now, if we're being chemists about the green tree, are we supposed to analyze the chemical composition of a jinn? I mean, Oakleon himself explicitly warns against speculating on their biology. He links the word jinn to janin, a fetus, and meknon, a covered mind. It just means hidden.
Well, they are beings of the unseen, yes.
But that's convenient, isn't it? When the text talks about trees, you pull out a chemistry set. When it talks about jinn, you say, oh, it's mysterious. My point is, you can't be a chemist in verse 15 and then a mystic in verse 16 just because it suits your argument. If the fire of the jinn is a metaphor for a volatile nature, which I think it is, then the fire from the tree is probably also a metaphor for God's power to change states, not a lesson on hydrogen bonding.
Then let's look at a verse where the physics are undeniable, where we don't have to speculate about the unseen. The barrier, the barzakh. Verse 19. He released the two seas meeting. Between them is a barrier which they do not transgress.
The meeting of the fresh and salt water.
Precisely. And Okyang highlights this as a description of a density barrier. When a river flows into the sea or when two seas of different salinity meet, they don't just mix immediately. There's a distinct wall of density, a pycnocline. The text even compares it to olive oil and water. They touch, yeltiki, but they stay distinct. I mean, how does a man in the desert of Mecca with zero knowledge of oceanography accurately describe the fluid dynamics of estuary fronts?
Or he used a metaphor for distinctness that people have observed on a small scale, like silt in a river, and just applied it to the sea.
A metaphor? This describes a physical mechanism that prevents the oceans from becoming a homogeneous sludge. This barrier is essential for marine life.
But look at the word barzakh. This is the crux of my issue with your literalism. Okoyan points out that the same word is used in Surah al-Mamunan to describe the barrier between the dead and the living. Now answer me this. Is there a physical, molecular wall standing behind a dead body?
No, of course not. That's a metaphysical barrier, a separation of dimensions.
Exactly. So if barzakh is metaphysical in one chapter, why must it be physical in this one? I'd argue the separation of seas is about the order of creation, that God keeps things distinct. He keeps the salt separate from the sweet, the living from the dead. It's a theme of divine order, not a lesson on water density. If you insist on the physics, you lose the thematic consistency.
But the context matters. You keep ignoring the surroundings. The verses in Ar-Rahman are about grain, husks, scented plants, the sun, the moon. These are tactile, agricultural, physical things. To suddenly insert a metaphysical metaphor right in the middle of a list of physical creation, that's what breaks consistency.
You want to talk about physical consistency? Fine. Let's talk about the pearls.
I knew we would get here.
Well, it's the elephant, or rather, the oyster in the room. Verse 22, from both of them the two seas emerge, pearl and coral, both the freshwater and the saltwater.
Correct. That is what the text says.
Okay, so scientifically, gem-quality pearls come from oysters. Oysters live in the ocean, saltwater. Coral is a marine invertebrate. It lives in the ocean, saltwater. You do not find coral reefs in the Nile. You do not find pearl oysters in the Danube. If this text is a scientific manual, as you claim, this is a factual error.
That is the standard critique, yes. The Quran fails Marine Biology 101.
And it's a devastating critique if you insist on literalism. You're forcing the text to claim that coral grows in rivers.
Only if you stop reading at the surface. Professor Okuyan offers a brilliant resolution here, and it's not just the defensive argument of, well, maybe we just haven't found the freshwater pearls yet. Though he does note that an absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. The real answer is in what he calls the pearl diving hermeneutic.
Explain that.
Look at the verbs. In other chapters, when the text talks about resources, it uses tastakhrijuma, you extract. It implies labor. You have to work for it. Here the text says they emerge, or come out, yakhruju, from both. Okuyan suggests this is an instruction on how to read the Quran itself.
How so?
Well, think about the objects. Coral is visible. It's near the surface. You can see it easily. This represents the literal meaning of the text, the surface reading. But pearls are hidden inside a shell, deep underwater. They don't just float by. You have to dive. You have to be ulul albab, a person of deep understanding.
So the argument is that the text is metaphorical?
The argument is that the text functions on two levels. The word both implies that value is hidden in all of God's creation, but accessing it requires different levels of effort. The error just vanishes when you realize the verse isn't about marine biology, it's about the methodology of wisdom. You can get the coral easily, but for the pearl, you must dive.
That is incredibly poetic, and frankly, it proves my point entirely. You just solved a scientific inaccuracy by turning it into a literary metaphor.
No, I'm saying the physical world is a signpost.
But you just admitted the physical world doesn't align with the text in this instance, unless you interpret it metaphorically. If you take it literally, you are still looking for coral in a river. That's the trap. If you dive into a river looking for a physical pearl, because a text told you to, you'll drown, empty-handed. But if you dive for wisdom, you find it. That's why I prefer the literary view. It prevents us from forcing facts where they don't fit.
But sometimes the facts do fit, and in ways that are startling. Look at the ships, the El Javari.
Ships passing through the sea like mountains. Yes.
Think about the physics of that. A mountain is heavy, stone sinks, yet these mountains float. Okuyan highlights this as a demonstration of the law of buoyancy. It's about the water's destiny. God programmed the water to lift. If that specific physical constant changed, global trade collapses. The ship is a suspended miracle. It's not just a boat, it's a manipulation of gravity and density.
It is. But there's a linguistic trap here too. Okuyan tells a story about this word El Javari. It shares a root with Kariya, which can mean flowing, but historically it also meant female slave or maidservant.
Ah, the man who misheard the verse.
Yes, it's a fantastic warning. A man heard a verse about flowing springs, Ainun Jariyatin, in paradise, and he got all excited because he thought he was being promised beautiful maidservants, Kariye. He heard what he wanted to hear.
A dangerous mistake to make.
But a telling one. It highlights the danger of superficial reading. He missed the flow and focused on desire. When we look at the ships, if we only focus on the tonnage and the physics, we might miss the flow of the argument itself. The ship is described as a mountain, not to make us calculate displacement, but to make us feel awe. The size is an emotional trigger, not a mathematical variable.
But the awe relies on the math. If a mountain floating wasn't a physical impossibility made possible by a divine law, it wouldn't be awesome. It would just be a boat. The science amplifies the gratitude. You can't be truly grateful for the ship unless you understand how unlikely it is that iron floats.
And that brings us to the refrain. Fabi ayi Allahi rabbikuma tukaziban. Which of the favors of your Lord will you deny? 31 times.
The heartbeat of the surah.
Science textbooks don't pause every 2 paragraphs to ask, are you grateful yet? This structure proves the intent is rhetorical. It's a catalog of gratitude. The sun, the moon, the trees, the ships, they are reasons to give thanks, not topics for a dissertation. And when you turn them into a dissertation, you stop being grateful and start arguing about water density.
I disagree. I think true gratitude comes from understanding complexity. The source mentions tadabbur, deep, rigorous contemplation. You can't deeply contemplate a sign if you dismiss it as just a pretty picture. When the text mentions the specific stages of human creation or the specific barriers in the sea, it is inviting us to look at the mechanism and say, the engineer of this is magnificent. The details matter.
My worry is fragility. If we pin our faith on the current scientific consensus about density barriers, and then science advances and changes that model, does our faith collapse? That's the danger of pinning the eternal to the temporary findings of science.
And my worry is abstraction. If we call everything a metaphor, we strip the universe book of its authority. God answers the question, what is Ar-Rahman? With evidence. Real, tangible evidence. If that evidence is all just literary imagery, it's a weak answer to a materialist skeptic. The answer has to be real.
We are out of time, so let me summarize. I maintain that this text is a masterpiece of rhetoric. It uses the physical world, the seas, the ships, the nations of East and West, to evoke a state of humility. But treating it as a rigorous scientific document forces us into corners, like the Pearl issue, that we have to philosophize our way out of.
And I maintain that the corners are where the treasure is. The precision of the stages of creation, the logic of opposites from opposites, and the description of the seas, it all suggests a creator who authored both the laws of physics and the verses of the Quran. We're invited to dive for the pearls, not just stare at the coral.
I think we can agree on one thing. Whether you see a pycnocline or a poetic barrier, the command is to look and to be grateful.
Indeed. And there is always more to explore.
Until next time.
Thank you for listening to The Debate.